This is Pastor Michael's Book Club on Restless. Let's get to it. So I expect that this, even as we do this, might be a little intermittent, but, you know, I don't know how many chapters are in this, but, well, maybe we should say we're starting a new book.
Dun, dun, dun.
So we've been talking about it in the past, but we're working through Strange New World, How Thinkers and Activists Redefined Identity and Sparked the Sexual Revolution by Carl Trueman.
Stud.
That's so this is the kind of briefer version of, or the condensed version of, his larger work, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. Mm-hmm. So I've read that. Now both of you have read this, right?
Yes.
I've read this
read
much
some
of
of it.
this.
Oh, so you've read most of it.
I read the whole thing last year,
So-
but I'm looking forward to reading it again.
Yeah. So we'll be working through it together and talking through it. I'm excited. The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self I found to be incredibly profound because Carl Trueman's an academic. You know, he's just assessing the situation, and then as far as like, well, where do we go from here? Even in you know, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, he has like a page and a half on like, well, here's some ideas.
Yeah.
And then he's done. And so I think it'll be fun for us too, just to think a little bit deeper about, hey, where do you go from some of these things? If this is the state that we are now in, what do we do?
Yeah.
And so that'll be good. But today we said, I said, since you guys have both read ahead already, I said I'm not going to have time to read the first chapter just yet. So we're just doing the foreword. So the foreword, and I guess, you know, there is a preface, but it's mostly just thank you to different people. But the foreword is written by Ryan T. Anderson. It's probably a name that some people know. I don't know if you guys have read anything or followed anything from him. So Ryan T. Anderson, he does a lot on cultural issues. So he wrote a book, I think it was called When Harry Became Sally.
Oh, I've heard that, yep.
And it was a book, it got a lot of publicity because it had to do with, you know, transgender issues, but because of its content, it was removed from Amazon and things like that, and heavily censored. So
all right.
So anyway,
it's a win.
Yeah, it's right. You're probably saying something true.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
You're probably doing okay. So anyway, so he writes the foreword of this book, and it at least gives us a little bit of some overview, some interesting ideas maybe to chew on before we actually get into the whole book. So this, in some ways, I guess, will be a little bit of a teaser for the rest of the book. If you haven't gotten it yet, I'll definitely include a link so that people who are listening can go get it. I know some folks have already been sending me that they got it. I should say, by the way, this is... I've had, just recently, I've had a number of people reaching out just about the last book club through Covenants Made Simple. I know some different folks that have gotten the book. I know some different folks who are like, hey, I sent this to my family member who has questions about these things. And I'm reading through the book with them or things like that. And so it's been helpful to folks, you know.
Sweet.
And since our last recording with Jonty, I've sought therapy, and I've been getting better since getting roasted as a Credo-Baptist. So this has been really good.
You've had your children baptized.
That's what that means. Yeah.
Smile and nod. Smile and nod. Too good. Well, maybe this book will do it, although I have a feeling that it will.
Probably won't.
Where's the chapter on baptism in this one? That'll be interesting.
It'll maybe show. We'll find a way to make it fit.
Yeah.
Anyway, so this, we'll just. I just wanted to say that because this has been a cool project. I just like hanging out with you guys and talking about this. But I like that we record it because I know it's been helpful to some folks.
Yeah, that's good.
Can maybe double up what we're doing then.
But I don't sound too ridiculous, I guess. If it's been helpful to some people.
No, they said you did.
Okay. They singled me out, actually. Could you boot him off the show? That would be really good. I'd give it 5 stars if we got him out of there.
You could replace him with AI or something. We have enough of your voice, we could just...
There we go, yeah.
Next episode is just AI Andrew.
Just you guys type it in.
Eventually it's just AI all of us.
Yes. How do they know it's not AI all of us now?
That's right.
There you
Whoa.
go. There's a thought right
And
there.
AI just breaking the fourth wall, talking about AI right now.
What is something that AI would never say?
Yeah.
It's an interesting question. Just
It
think about
is.
that.
Yeah.
Anyways, we are to the foreword of Strange New World. Anything that particular sticks out to you guys? I know it's only a couple pages.
Yeah, so on page 12 here, he kind of talks about the broad arc of what Carl Trueman was trying to accomplish with his original book, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, but again, also with this book, Strange New World. And he says, I would summarize the broad arc of this work as an account of how the person became a self, and the self became sexualized, and sex became politicized. Now, of course, the person of the Psalms, of St. Paul's epistles, and of St. Augustine's confession was also a self, in the sense of having an interior life, but the inward turn of the biblical tradition was at the service of the outward turn toward God. The self that Western civilization cultivated up until a few hundred years ago was what Harvard political theorist Michael Sandel described as an encumbered self, in contrast to modernity's unencumbered self. So that's a really great point, I think, is that we're not, as Christians, we're not saying that there's no such thing as an interior life. There's no such thing as individuals. We're just saying that the individual life, the interior life, your emotions, your feelings are subject to the reality that God has created, right? And you see that with the Psalms, right? A lot of the Psalms are, Lord, why is this happening? Like I feel this way. I'm down. I'm depressed. I'm downcast. I'm being oppressed. But I look to you, right? I turn to you. Same with, like, if you've ever read Augustine's Confessions, really great. Like, he kind of does the same thing where he's like, these are the things I was struggling with. This is the sin I had in my life. But Lord, you knew it all and you forgave me. And I praise you and I thank you. There's always a turn from the introspection to looking to God, right? But the problem is now is that in our modern society, we've jettisoned God, and it's only just this self-introspection, and that's obviously not going well, right? Because when we make ourselves God, when we make ourselves autonomous, all sorts of weird things happen. All sorts of...
Yeah, obviously, like, you are an individual to a certain extent.
Yeah.
You are a person that has your own personality, your own, there's something about you that is distinct from others and distinct from the rest of creation. But actually, the way that God has made the world is that you and your self is actually best fitted, in a sense, into creation as it is directed outward. And so you can't actually be just an autonomous self.
Yeah.
When we'll talk a little bit maybe about expressive individualism and how Truman uses that idea, but that you can't, you lose everything when you are a self in that way. Really, what we would term this biblically is it's literally selfishness, right? It's self-centeredness. But you can't be the center. So, one of the images that you have in Romans 1 as creation, specifically man, as man turned away from God, what ends up happening is there's this kind of turning away from God that turns inward, and it slowly begins to worship creation, and then it turns to worshiping man himself, and it leads to in Romans 1 this kind of self-centeredness that directs one almost entirely inward. The problem is that there's nothing in you that you don't receive from outside of you, and so the idea of being a self that is all just on your own, completely autonomous, is actually an absurdity. And what I actually think happens is not in a literal way, but in a certain sense, when you do this, you begin to cease to exist. So it starts with self-centered, pleasure-seeking, it starts with sexual revolution and things like that. Slowly what actually happens is people begin to lose grip on reality itself. And so that we actually have a lot more of that today. So, Carl Trueman, as he traces this, and he does a great job. But you also, I think, see that, the logical next step in the revolutions that have been happening, is a kind of revolution that leads to the end of existence itself. Not, not
an existential,
not literally,
right.
but as far as people losing touch with reality, losing touch with what their purpose is, losing touch with basically disassociation, which is extremely common, especially in our generation and younger. That's becoming more and more common, and I think that's the logical next step.
I'm just thinking, like, and tell me if this kind of makes sense, but if we throw off all external, objective reality, and it's all just dependent on us to come up with define who we are and define what we're supposed to be, well, we've kind of lost touch with everything outside of ourselves. So it's where do we go? Right? That's the question a lot of people are asking. Where do I go? You've told me to, make my own path and all that stuff. But it's but how do I do that?
Yeah.
If I'm just trying to blaze a whole new trail that no one has ever, which is again, it's ridiculous. But it's where are you supposed to go? What does that lead to? Right? What area of the world has other people not touched, and again has not been really shaped and defined by God and what He's declared as reality?
Yeah, everything is. This on page 13, just not long after the same paragraph of what you were reading from, Andrew, it says, the modern self finds himself in the midst of what Robert Bellah has described as a culture of expressive individualism, where each of us seeks to give expression to our individual inner lives rather than seeing ourselves as embedded in communities and bound by natural and supernatural laws. Authenticity to inner feelings rather than adherence to transcendent truths becomes the norm. And this is the thing that actually that doesn't work very long. You can pretend for a time, right? So as a culture, on a cultural level, even on family levels, you can run off fumes for a little while, right? You can pretend for a little while. You can, in a sense, borrow the worldview and a lot of the existential substance of a previous generation. But once you lose touch with the source of that, you begin to lose it all, right? You can't. It doesn't last very long. It only lasts a generation or two before it's all gone, and then you have nothing, right? Then you have nothing to work on. I was struck once. I was reading. Maybe anybody who homeschools has maybe heard of the book, The Well-Trained Mind. I think that's what it is. It's about classical education in the home. And it's by a woman named, I think, Susan Wise Bauer. But at one point, I was reading this, and she says something to the effect of, we put all this pressure on kids to be creative, but we give them none of the tools with which to be creative with. And I was struck by that, about how, actually that is what we do because of this expressive individualism. We have this sense that everybody has this innate ability to just do things, and we're not supposed to add anything to it, right? They're this wonderful creative being, and we just need to let it out. And anybody who has kids knows that's insane. Right? That's insane.
And terrifying.
It's terrifying.
You can't just let them. You can't just let them express their individualism.
And if you were a functional member of society, no one let you do that either. Right? No one let you do that.
But more and more, what we have is, expressive individuals and the complete collapse of any kind of society, of community, of family, of anything like that. What you have is literally chaos, right? Chaos is all that comes from that, culturally speaking.
I was listening to it was a Classical Conversations podcast, and he was interviewing the guy who started the Institute for Excellence in Writing. And it was this kind of like the guy was talking about his approach to teaching kids how to write, and it was actually really profound. Was that he has them really just read like great works of like literature or like poetry, like sections of it, and then they just rewrite it. Right? They practice rewriting that, and then eventually then they start to, okay, now rewrite it in your own words. And I think it's a really great idea, because it's like I'm coming from something that is objectively good, true, and beautiful, and I'm learning how that looks, and then I'm building that repertoire with it, like, in my own mind, to then be able to produce good, true, and beautiful works later on. But it's kind of like what you're saying, Michael, is that we just expect people, like, we want to know what's inside you when nothing has been poured into you. Right. There's been nothing that has been given to you. You've not accepted anything or taken anything that's truly good and beautiful in, and then we want you to come up with something. And yeah.
And maybe, you'd even want to say, like, and of course, like, even from early times, and like there are people that are able to, like, that have true creativity, that have interesting ideas, that they come up with and things, and all of that comes from somewhere else, right? It all begins somewhere else.
Yes.
It's because you are embedded in God's world, and every atom of it is declaring something about Him and something about His praise and glory. Then, like, there's no such thing as you just are this completely blank slate, and we want to keep that way, so that you're not influenced by anything coming from the world or culture. Actually, no, the very fact that you've been created by God means that you're influenced from the beginning in one way or another, right? There's different ways that takes hold and affects people. One of the things that I've thought about and think about this idea of that self-centeredness and the focus on self, the turning inward, is that actually what God requires of us as mankind is directly opposed to that. Because what He requires of us is summed up in love God and love people, both of which are, pointed out.
Yeah, the law. This is all the law and the prophets.
This is all the law and the prophets, and this is the sum of what God requires of us as people, is to be directed toward God, directed toward our neighbor, and that's and so quite literally, this puts you in a position. Puts you in a position where you are, you are directly breaking the law of God.
Yeah. Yeah, so it says here on page 13, this modern self then is not accountable to the theologians who preach on how to conform oneself to God, but to the therapists who counsel how to be true to oneself, thus giving the rise to what Philip Reif described as the triumph of the therapeutic. And it is the therapeutic self that has become sexualized. Where for most of human history, our sexual embodiment was rather uninteresting, sheer, given, allowing us to unite conjugally and form families, the modern therapeutic turns inward, counsels people to be true to their inner sexual desires. What was once simply self-evident, that a boy should grow up to be a man, to become a husband, and then assume the responsibilities of a father, now entails a search to discover an inner truth about gender identity and sexual orientation. Yeah, so kind of like what you've been saying, Michael, is that as we turn inwardly, it just, like, reality just becomes, well, it doesn't become blurred, but people's perception of what reality is just becomes blurred and more distorted.
Even the most obvious, right? Like, what is the most obvious and clear and, like, direct,
indisputable.
You can't escape it. Yeah,
right. You start to question those things and fall apart in those ways.
Yeah, it's funny to me too, is like, even this expressive individualism, you still can't escape the fact that it's a community, right? We talk about the LGBTQ community, right? All that stuff. It's like, well, you're still being influenced by people. You're still being influenced by those who are outside. Like, we see such a rise in people identifying as, gay, lesbian, transgender. Well, why? Well, because it's become such a huge presence online, like social media, but in our world, like, there's so many people that are saying, yes, you should explore this. You should explore this, young people.
Right.
So,
for a long time, you had, especially with the research of the Kinsey Institute and others, you have the idea that, okay, well, 10% of the population is going to be this way, one way or the other.
Yeah.
And if you look into how those studies were done and stuff, it's really gross and horrific stuff. But like, there was still this, even there, you still have this like tie, like, oh, there's just something natural, like it's going to be about this way.
Yeah.
But what we've seen now, we've seen the lie that's been put to that because of just almost exponential growth in
people identifying
these
with it.
people identifying in these various ways, because people are more and more, number one, disconnected from those communities, and because it's quite literally taught more and more.
Yeah.
And people become what they're taught, right? Like, people become what they're raised to be. And it's not always intentional.
Yeah.
But so for instance, when you just have the massive breakdown in families, you no longer have just the stable environment of one father, one mother together, portraying for you what the world is like. Rather, it becomes a lot messier. And so all of a sudden, well, your perception of yourself becomes a lot messier too.
Yeah.
And so you have that breakdown, that continued fracturing, if you will.
Yeah.
So I read this great book that definitely recommend by Walker Percy called Lost in the Cosmos. It's a great book. And I can't, summarize everything that he has in it. I wish I could, because it would be, I think it'd be really beneficial in these kinds of conversations to think through some of his ideas too. But he basically, the idea of his book is that, modern man is lost in the cosmos. We don't have a place. Because of the different kinds of, ideas that have worked their way into the modern psyche, we've been disconnected and alienated from any place in the universe, in the cosmos. So we are lost in it. He describes modern man at times as like a ghost haunting his own life. And so anyway, one of the things that he says, though, is the way that we try to reassert ourselves and our reality usually comes in first, like when you've been disconnected in this way, the first way that it shows itself is through sexual promiscuity and just, different elements of sexuality become one of the ways that basically you try to prove your existence. This is how you can, how can you know? Well, it's hard to doubt your place in existence when you are sexually connected to somebody else, especially when you are sexually gratified, right? Like it's hard to deny that and deny your existence and reality in those moments. However, it's not impossible. And actually, over time, that too, especially when it's not properly ordered, when it's not being engaged in the way that God has designed it to be, actually you start to lose touch with that too. It stops being, even just biochemically how we're made to be. It stops being the same kind of existential proof of your existence that it once was. You start to lose touch even with that. And he argues that what follows that is violence. I think one of the reasons that we see the increasing violence all around us in society, why people are, angrier and angrier and lashing out more and more. A lot of that comes from that kind of existential need to prove to oneself their own existence. Now, again, that's not going to be conscious. It's not going to be something that somebody says, I really need to decide whether or not I exist. Yeah. That's the natural outworking, though, is that in order to really make it clear, yes, like there's something real about all of this. You begin to act out in violence toward others, and obviously we see that with school shootings and rioting and all kinds of stuff going on that is very much, I think, connected to that idea. Yeah. But this is just what happens. As you focus on yourself, you lose touch with everything, and it becomes this inverse of the command to love God, love neighbor, and you begin to hate God and hate neighbor, to hate yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's why we also see the rise in suicide too, not just outward violence, but even violence towards yourself, right? That I should decide like when I live or die. Like I should decide like if I feel pain or not other people, right? Like so I think that's why we also see just the rise in nihilism, the rise in like depression and anxiety, and then the rise in suicide, right? That violence isn't just again, it's the ultimate act of expressive individualism, is like to take your own life. Yeah, because there's something like that's something like it's weird to say like you can't deny that, because like once you do it, you're dead, and you're not there, you're not here anymore. But that's like one thing. It's like I can't deny that I'm taking my own life. Like that's
even just self-harm in general.
Yeah, self-harm
is
general.
Like a lot of that comes out of this, right? It comes out of the people, especially when you look back to the 90s, early 2000s, and there's kind of a rise in self-harm, cutting, different things like that. There's also a rise in a lot of eating disorders and things like that. And a lot of this was happening in communities that from the outside looked like they should be happy, right? Generally, like middle class, suburban families. You've got money. You're not in need, right? You're not like having to every day go out and wonder if you're going to have what you need to live. And so you have this weird contrast almost, where you see from the outside, you imagine the nice looking suburban neighborhood and middle class home, and dad's going to work every day, and you go to a school that probably has a decent amount of money coming in from all of the property tax, and you think, wow, this is a really nice place. And at the same time, you have this huge rise in drug abuse, self-harm, a big rise in eating disorders and things like that. And it seems weird, but actually no, it is because it's particularly in those places that people are the most disconnected from those things which remind them of their place in the world. And all they have is their self. Usually families too are kind of individual units that are doing their own thing. Whereas even in other situations you won't have that. I mean, if you're just struggling to get by every day, right. That has its own problems. It has its own issues of self-harm and things like that. But a lot of the time, that actually just keeps people, right, in a sense, just recognizing, I have a place today. I have to go out, and if I don't go work, we don't have food. And so it just connects you more directly with your basic needs, and reminds you of somewhat of the place you have. It might not be a great understanding. It may not be a broader understanding. You may just be seeking to get to that point where we could be in the suburbs and we could be harming ourselves. Like that's to put it in, in that light. But there's that element of disconnection. It doesn't actually have to do with what it looks like on the outside. Like, oh, you should be happy, right? You should be happy. No, if you're disconnected from your place in the cosmos as God has made it, which is going to be true, especially outside of Christ, and increasingly so as a culture removes itself from Christ. And I think, by the way, especially true in an apostate culture,
Yes.
as opposed to like a pagan culture. Often pagan cultures were much more, there was a lot of, horrific things and self-harm and stuff, but they were much more connected to the world and to community in a way that that specifically in the Western world, as it has apostatized, as it has like left Christ, things have gotten to a place where actually it doesn't seem like they've ever been before when it comes to these existential issues and not actually knowing your place in the whole of things.
Yeah. So, Chase, you're a youth pastor.
Director. But yeah.
I apologize. Director. Got to get the terminology right. As you counsel, I don't want you to devolve any information about that you're not comfortable with, but like, is there kind of, you've seen this as you've counseled younger people? And,
of course.
Like what are the things you see in like this expressive individualism and how it's coming up in the subsequent generations?
Yeah, I think if anything, it's just strengthened my resolve. I don't want my kids in the public school system right now. I don't know. It's
we could have told you that.
Yeah, this is just it's the air kids are breathing. It's it's funny how.
But as long as they have an hour of youth group every week.
That's right. Well, then they're good.
Yeah.
That's parents can wipe their hands. They've done their Christian discipleship as a family. Don't worry, my kids are going to church on Sunday and Wednesday night, so they're good. No, and it's interesting how challenging it can appear to be for these teenagers to distinguish between. Well, obviously, my teachers are saying it. This is universally accepted, and everybody believes this, and it must be true. In the same way that if my pastor on Sunday or director on Wednesday night says this, that must also be true. And so they start to try to parse together these fabrics which don't go together, frankly. These materials that, like, you're actually trying to like make this profound expositional discovery from the text that actually you're reading in a lot of the worldview that you've started to develop that is so frankly against the grain of what the original author would have had in mind or his audience. And so thusly it's really impacting how we read the Bible. So I don't know. I think the challenge there is you don't know what you don't know, and especially for all these kids who are being told by the people that they're told to respect, their parents, they send them to school because obviously my parents wouldn't send me to this school if my parents didn't trust the people that were teaching here, which also means ipso facto they trust the teaching that's happening. So it becomes very like the idea that you shouldn't be real to your truest self. That would be a very like, well, why shouldn't I be true? All of my I've always been told. In fact, even frankly, personally, me, Chase, I can still think of like when I was in elementary school, starting to have those thoughts of like, man, I'm being told to like, they didn't use the term authenticity like they do today, but that's what was being argued. And I can remember asking teachers like, well, where's the line? You're telling me to like, I don't even know the nomenclature. You're telling me to be creative, but like, you still want me to sing the alphabet in the right order, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like
you're still going to grade this.
Exactly. So like,
on some standard,
where is the line?
Sometimes you phone it in. So
Right. Only at MBTS.
Only at MBTS.
But man, no, it's certainly challenging. There's a lot of necessary necessary asking questions of, well, hey, where does that come from? Where do you where do you think that belief stems from? And do you let's weigh it. Let's test the accuracy of that thing.
Well, I remember listening to a guy talking about, he was an apologist. I was listening to his podcast or whatever, and he said he went to this one building. It was like their grand opening or whatever, and it was new, it was bold because they had like staircases that didn't lead anywhere. They had all this stuff that like just didn't seem to serve any purpose. So it was supposed to be this big abstract thing that made you think outside the box.
For next year.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. It was supposed to be profound and abstract and this is going against the grain of everything. And he sits there and he asks the person who's giving the tour, I wonder if they did that with a foundation, right? If they made the foundation purposeless, if they could draw outside the lines,
it's all over the place.
Yeah, let's do all this. Why do we?
That's a great observation.
Why does the foundation have to be within code and standard?
Yep.
And everything else can be, it's like
all the frosting. With the frosting, we can be creative. We can tell people to be creative.
Exactly.
But with the actual
cake,
the substance, we're not going to screw with that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So
we're still going to follow the recipe there.
It's just funny because it's this they're like putting this veneer on everything that like it can just be whatever you want it to be. You can create your own world, but yet that's in reality that's not the way things are.
That goes back to what you were talking about earlier of like this idea of this creates a foundationless society, a basisless society. So yeah, maybe you can do it for a generation, but then where does it leave you? If you do start to screw with the foundation, if you do start to screw with the structure, bad news bears, you won't ever get to those meaningless stairs because there's going to be a problem way before that.
Exactly, right?
Yeah, at some point it all falls apart. But the scary thing is that you can live in that place for a long time, where you're still taking for granted the foundation, but you're destroying everything above it. Right, everything else, and you will eventually. And I mean, we see this all over the place. That eventually you will go for the foundation. Eventually you will try to destroy that too, and people are actively trying to do that everywhere around us right now, and it's a really dangerous game to play. So he said this is, I think this gives some idea of kind of where we'll be heading and also where we want to maybe take some of this conversation and talking a little bit more about what do we do, because it's hard to know. But I think that one of the things that is helpful about tracing this historically down through centuries is recognizing that this didn't happen in a day. This didn't just happen in our lifetime. It's not like, man, the 90s were great, and now look at us. Although our kids have now been accustomed to saying things like, let's watch a 90s movie, because we've watched some 90s movies that Emily and I grew up with that we love, and that we're like, these are just good movies because we're just used to them.
On the contrary, I watched X-Men, the original one last night from 2000, and I was like, this is no.
2000, not the 90s.
No, well,
it's on the other side of the millennium.
It's on the other side. But anyway, we just, our kids look back to that. It's like the good days.
Right, the good old days.
But they're not the good days, right? They're not actually the good days. And this has been building, and things have been moving in this direction for a long time. And what that means is that the fix isn't going to come overnight either. There's no quick change. There's no, hey, well, we're just going to go and we're going to logically reason with everybody.
We're going to legislate this one law.
We're going to put this in place, and then everything will change. It's not going to happen. And probably even we're not the people to do it, because we were all trained in this system, brought up in this system. And what we have to see is that actually we need to be preparing the way for the next generations. But toward that end, Ryan Anderson, he says, this is on page 15. I'll actually start in 14 just to get a little bit of the context. But he says, most importantly, Truman calls on the church not only to bear witness to the truth, but to be a place of belonging for the broken, forming community and living culturally. Families in particular will need to consider what this means in the formation of their children. And here's the line that I think is really central. He says, simply attending church each Sunday will not cut it anymore, if it ever did. Socially embodied ways of living in conformity with ultimate realities will prove essential. And actually, I mean, they'll prove essential. They are essential. They are existentially essential, as we've been talking about there. Like, for you to know your place, to know what you're for, to have purpose and meaning, actually that's exactly what is going to be necessary, is communal life that is focused on Christ, that is directed by His revelation, and so it gives you your place, you know. But that's something that we have to live out, and that's something that has to be lived out over the course of a long time, generations even, in order to fully realize the blessings. I mean, you can have some of the blessing right now, I mean today, but to fully realize all of the blessings that come from this, it's going to take time, right? It's quite literally covenantal in nature, and so I think it's just a good reminder as we get started on this that, hey, whatever the fix is, number one, it won't be easy. Number two, it's not going to come overnight. It's going to take a lot,
Yeah, I read a book by James K. Smith called "You Are What You Love," and I'll be honest, I slept on it. Like I was like, this kind of seems like a weird title. Like, but I had to read it for a class. I was blown away. It was an excellent book, but he really talked about this, how do we shape the next generation? Like, how do we shape those who come after us? How do we shape our kids to love Christ and to be a Christian people and to change the culture around them? It's like we have to create a robust Christian culture, because it's not just a matter of this is the right thing, telling them the right thing. It's a matter of getting them to love the right things, right? And just like his like going into like talking about like, you know, the liturgy, not just of your church service, but of your whole life. Like letting the church, like having the church shape your whole life, your whole week, your whole existence. Like that, like everything that happens outside the church is just an outpouring of like the covenant community of your local body of believers. And it's like, it was really good. But I think that's really what he's touching on here is that, you know, a place of belonging for the broken, forming communities and living culturally, right? That we create these robust Christian cultures in our local churches, in our homes, right? And you said that we're relaying the foundation of Christ, right? Like the Apostle Paul says, you know, no one can lay any other foundation except that which was already laid, which is Christ. He's the foundation. So I think getting back to that, right? And then like you said, creating institutions, building back institutions that support that mission, whether it's Christian schools, you know, Christian homeschooling groups, you know, businesses where, you know, we're hiring people within the church, we're, you know, all that stuff. We're building business together with other people within the church. Like we're creating, you know, structures and infrastructure that is supporting this cultural revolution, as it were, you know, this cultural reformation back to the foundation that is Jesus Christ. I think is so vital in our day. But like you said, Michael, this is like a multi-generational effort, and this is what it's going to take. It's going to take a view of we're in this for the long run, right? I think, you know, we talked about it a little bit last time, but the kind of dispensational premillennial viewpoint that is so popular in our evangelical world really has like been detrimental to this idea of like we're in this for the long term. Like, look, if we're halfway through like laying the foundation and the Lord comes back, praise God, right? But what happens if we never start building the foundation because we, you know, and we never start the, you know, framing up the building, and the Lord is still tarrying, and we're just sitting there doing nothing. And that's my challenge, honestly. And that was really part of, again, I'm kind of getting off on a tangent here. I don't want to go that route, but that idea of like, oh, we shouldn't do anything because, you know, Christ is coming back again. Like we will not have a long-term view of like how to build these infrastructures, of how to create this culture. And
you should just have the view of, I mean, yeah, Christ is coming back soon. I want to build something great for him. You know, like,
exactly.
For more on this topic, see Jaunty Roads Covenant Made Simple.
That's right.
Yeah.
Very good. Very good.
But yeah. One last thing I wanted to. What did I want to read?
This is just a foreword, by the way.
Yeah. We're just in a foreword.
Yeah, this is us talking about 5 or 6 pages worth. So you wait till we get to chapter 1.
Yeah.
It's gonna get.
It's gonna be Joe Rogan length. Watch out. People at the coffee shop are gonna force us to buy more things. I bought nothing today. So.
Yeah. Well, he talked about here it is on page 15 where Mr. Anderson talks about the book that he wrote.
Mr.
Ryan Anderson. When Harry became Sally, responding to the transgender moment. So he says, the title was meant to suggest 2 things: that the transgender ideology was not the truth about man, but was the result of various cultural forces producing this moment in history. And with that one generation, popular culture had gone from questioning whether a man and a woman could be just friends in the book, or whatever, it was a book or a movie, When Harry Met Sally, to declaring there was a civil right for a man to become a woman. So, like, right there, he makes that claim that, like, look, transgender ideology is not the truth about man. It's not the objective reality about humankind, right? And we just see that it was various cultural forces that are producing this moment in history, which I think is a very interesting observation. But it's true, really, right? Like, it's funny to me because they always want to say, oh, gender is a social construct. And I'm like, well, transgenderism isn't, right? Do you like the rise of this and like the influence of culture and social media and like pop culture on like pushing this agenda? That doesn't count as a social construct. Like, what are you talking about? Like, what does that mean? But I think like his claim that, right, the truth that this is not the truth about mankind. This is not reality. And we kind of have been talking about how, again, when we turn inwardly, we start to lose touch with outward reality.